These pants are kind of short. Do I look like Steve Urkel? Ooh, the lights are on in room 6 and 7. I must be getting behind.
What's that smell?
Gui! This is my inner voice.
Sorry, I had FOMO.
Oh, wake up, rethink the status quo. When you get your money right, then you're the one who runs your life. Come build a wealthy spirit with Sammie and Michelle.
We all have an inner voice, an inner monologue that plays out in our mind. For some, it's a literal voice. For others, images or videos are playing out like a movie on a screen. Today's episode is about recognizing that inner voice, because that inner voice is a huge factor in building a wealthy spirit.
Yes, Sammie. There are so many internal and external factors that can influence how we think, that can get in the way of defining our own personal values, things that we think are really important to discovering what is most important to you. So we wanted to go step 1, talk a little bit about the internal voice, the inner voice, and also come away with some tips on how to actually recognize and tame that inner voice.
Exactly, Michelle. Part of building a wealthy spirit is getting rid of the ego, getting rid of that inner voice. And the reason is when we have that inner voice constantly telling us what to think, constantly having us be judged, we are really not able to see what we truly want and what we really desire. And knowing what we want is really important to building an intentional life.
Let's get into it, Sammie.
But before we get into it, Michelle, let's talk about our partnership with Riverside.
Yes, I'm such a fan of this partnership, Sammie, because we have been using Riverside for the last 2 years. It's a platform where we can do audio recording, video recording. We use it for every single one of our episodes, and we use it for when we bring on really cool guests, like we'll be having in the next few weeks. And the thing is, when it comes to Riverside, the reason we like it is because we really want to put out a great high quality show every single week. And we want to make sure we don't have to worry about things like, is the internet connection good? Is there going to be audio problems? There are so many little things that can happen when you're recording a podcast that Riverside literally eliminates. There are so many things that we don't have to worry about. We don't have to stress about what our audio or video is going to sound like because they've done such a great job at making sure each person gets a local recording and then they upload it to the computer, send it to us, bada bang, we got ourselves some good recording. So if you're thinking about doing a podcast, which we know a lot of people have been thinking about doing, for example, our cousin Joji for Deconstructed Women, which we will be on this week, has started a podcast. And so we're excited that so many of you are thinking about it. And if you do, we recommend using Riverside. Look at our show notes for a link to get started.
Back to today's episode about recognizing your inner voice. The inner voice is that voice that we all have inside our heads. Sometimes it's saying negative things, sometimes it's saying positive things, but oftentimes that voice is going off.
What's really interesting, Sammie, is that we also found this really great piece from BBC, What the Voice Inside Your Head Says About You, which actually looks at specific scientific studies done by psychologists like Russell Hurlburt, who we will mention, that first and foremost answers the question, is there actually an inner voice? Because I think it's something that, for me, I for sure hear something in my head, and I've become a little bit more in tune with it and know that sometimes it's talking, sometimes it isn't. But this actually varies a little bit person to person. So it's cool that there are people out there who are actually trying to measure this, which is very difficult because it's inside of us. And we found that piece really complemented what we're talking about today.
The psychologist Russell Hurlburt, he did an experiment to figure out what exactly is going on in these people's heads, which is kind of...
Beep, beep, beep.
He used a beeper to figure out what is going on in these people's heads. Yes, I believe it's like a pager. It's what it seems like to me. But he would give them this beeper that would beep throughout the day. And at that time, he wanted them to do an audio recording of what was going on in their mind. And they were really careful because they didn't want to be like, oh, what are you thinking? What are you saying to yourself? They didn't want to prompt someone so much that they're literally telling them how to describe what's going on in their brain. They just wanted them to describe what's going on in that person's own words.
Stop. What were you just thinking? What was going through your brain?
I was thinking that truck that was passing by, it turned into the side road. And I'm like, that is going to mess up our audio right now,
Yes, that is true, Sam. Cars are very inconvenient to our audio. And in that moment, you were very attuned to what you were thinking. But if you're listening to this podcast, when I said stop, think, identify, it may have been a little bit harder because it's super difficult to objectively interrupt your inner voice.
Mm-hmm.
Because as soon as someone's like, well, what are you thinking? You're like, what was I thinking? Oh my God, I was thinking about that. No. So it's cool that they did this study with these beepers because honestly, it is difficult to actually know what people are thinking.
Yes. They found that the inner voice varies a lot, but most people have an inner voice. There are some people who do not have an inner voice. Siddhartha Buddha, for example. No, kidding. Apparently, there's normal people around walking around with no inner voice. That must be wonderful.
Some people hear the voice 100% of the time. Some people are apparently enlightened and they never hear an inner voice. Who knew?
And the style of inner voice really varies. Like some people see images or photos. Some people literally hear like a dialogue. A few people actually see it in word form. Yes. So it was really interesting. It reminded me of a little experiment my English teacher did with us in 11th grade. I had this English teacher who I loved. Her name was Mrs. Walker. She was an older lady and she had these like icy blue eyes that were like so cool. They reminded me of Frozen, but Frozen wasn't out yet, but reminded me of that movie if it was around then. And we were about to read this book called The Sound and the Fury, which I despise. I hated that book. I love most books, but that book was just honestly terrible for me.
Wow. Way to drag William Faulkner in our podcast.
I'm like, this is a book that people like. But
is this art or is this trash?
I'm like, this kind of chaos I've never known. So she asked us to do this exercise where we record what our thoughts are. And she didn't tell us what this all meant. We hadn't read The Sound and the Fury yet, so we didn't really have any instructions on what to record. She just asked us, over the next minute or so, record what you are thinking. Can you write what you are thinking? So everybody writes down what they're thinking, and then she asks us to give examples. So I read mine aloud to the class, and it was like 1, my stomach is hurting. 2, it's cold in this classroom. 3, I read an article once about the thoughts of males and females and how males oftentimes have no thoughts. So I bet this activity is kind of hard for the males in our class. 4. And I was going on. And when she asked people to comment on what they noticed from all the different people's thoughts, they were like, oh, Sammie's thoughts are numbered. And of course, they're like not physically numbered in my brain, but they are clear and distinct. They are not such a messy stream of consciousness. Probably the reason I hated The Sound and the Fury. It's more organized than that. And a lot of people would just have a paragraph where they're kind of like rambling on, and that was their thoughts. We all had different ways that we think, but most of us had thoughts.
That's so interesting, Sammie. Knowing you, I can see that your thoughts are organized because you are that type of person. But I would never have expected that, which it's interesting because, again, we are in our own heads and we don't really experience other people's thoughts or inner voices or videos. So it's interesting to hear other people's perspectives. Another thing that psychologists talked about in this piece was that the voice can take different personalities too, if you will. It can be the faithful friend, the ambivalent parent, the proud rival, the helpless child. I totally related to this because I am always having little conversations in my head And a lot of times I enjoy them, or I'm, rehearsing something or a speech, whatever it might be. But one thing I noticed recently is that sometimes my dialogue will be a bit argumentative. For example, even recently, I shared a tweet that went a little bit viral. And the thought behind it was something along the lines of, my parents took risks so that I wouldn't have to take risks, but now I want to take risks. And that hit a nerve for a lot of people. A lot of people seem to resonate with that. But a few people, they would write things like, just do the thing, or you can't listen to your parents. And I, in my head, was writing back to these people like, I'm fine, okay? I have literally moved multiple times across the country. I live in the middle of nowhere. Are you even taking any risk? Okay, I'm talking to you. This is a direct thing for you. And what I realized is that I was having a dialogue with my haters.
And I would say these people are not even haters because they were just encouraging you to do whatever you wanted to do and to not be scared.
It's so true, Sammie. And the craziest thing is I actually have no haters. I will oftentimes, I found when I was writing something or creating something, I will start to, in my mind, think about my haters. And I'll be like, oh, well, if somebody thinks that my take on aging is too spicy, this is what I would say back to them. And I started to realize that I have no haters. This conversation is directed towards nobody. And in terms of my inner voice, I recognize this and I was like, okay, I need to shut this down. If I get haters, I can go and practice my dialogue, but I don't need to preamble this. My family, my parents, my sister, my friends, my people online are so encouraging. I don't know why I'm wasting my time or energy thinking about these fictional haters.
And that's a great question, Michelle. Why are we wasting our time with these fictional haters or with any of these inner thoughts in general? And you know who has a great answer to this question? It is Tim Urban of the Wait But Why blog. He has this awesome piece called Taming the Mammoth, Why You Should Stop Caring What Other People Think. In this article, he talks about our inner voice as this mammoth mind. Mammoth being an ancient mammal.
Those giant elephant-like creatures with the tusk and hairy.
Kind of like a woolly buffalo. You know what a mammoth is. Okay.
No, it's a woolly mammoth. There are no woolly buffaloes.
Anyway, you may or may not know what a mammoth exactly is, but you get the picture. It's an old animal.
Yeah, our parents don't know any animals, so this is partially for them.
Oh, you know what? Activity before next podcast, we will ask them what they think a mammoth is, and we will share back with you in our community time. But yes, anyway, these mammoths, they're old animals from a prehistoric time, 50,000 BC, as Tim Urban says. And in that time period, it was really important that you do get along with the social circle or the people around you, because otherwise you could be extricated and this would be loss of all your resources. You would probably lose help for your shelter. You'd lose food. It was literally deadly. So Tim Urban argues that because of this mammoth mind, we have this life or death reaction to being accepted by others. We want to fit in. We want people to like us. We want to be respected. A lot of what's going on with our inner voice is about maintaining that image to the outside world.
I love the way he depicts it, Sammie. If you look at the piece itself, he draws out little woolly mammoths, mammothies. And they're so cute, and they're just standing behind people in social situations, criticizing them or speaking out their deepest fears. And it's super funny and super cute. But it's a really great way to visualize in your head the inner voice, because it's you're in a room and there's just this mammoth behind you talking smack or whatever your inner voice is saying.
Yes. He even has more specific examples of what the mammoth can be. And one of those examples is the puppet master. And the puppet master is somebody who is around you in your environment who actually takes on the mammoth's voice. So there's someone that you know, but the voice in your head, your inner voice, actually becomes their voice. And it says things that you anticipate that they might say. And for some reason, I am really sensitive to this. Like if I live with somebody or am constantly in close quarters with somebody, their thoughts will become the inner voice in my brain.
She's talking about all other roommates except for me.
For some reason, not Michelle, because she is me. But even like roommates that I love and who are totally kind, I'll be like, oh, they may be wondering why I'm in my room studying all day. And it's like, nobody cares.
They might be thinking, oh, I haven't washed that dish yet.
They might be thinking that. But we worry about that because our woolly mammoth brain says, if they hate you, you may be extricated from this domicile, or you're going to have to live in hostility. And we don't want that.
I feel like this puppet master is maybe a more concrete version of when I'm having a dialogue with my haters. But I do think a lot of times we will live our life for the one person we think is criticizing us or our fear of what other people will say, instead of actually doing the thing that's most authentic to us.
So maybe you've noticed that you have an inner voice. Maybe you haven't, or maybe you kind of have a vague sense that there's an inner voice, but you're trying to figure out, what is this inner voice trying to say to me and why? We have some strategies to help recognize the inner voice.
One of my favorite ways, Sammie, that I've been adopting these past few years is journaling. And not just any kind of journaling. I'm a big fan of Julia Cameron. She wrote The Artist's Way, and she talks about the morning pages, which is a super popular exercise where you essentially journal about 3 pages a day, first thing in the morning, and you just journal whatever comes to mind. So for me, a lot of times it starts out something like, okay, I just woke up, I'm drinking my coffee, it's a little bit hot, I burnt my tongue. The flowers we bought are dying, but they're really beautiful. I'm really worried about editing this podcast, making sure it comes out on time. Basically, you're just writing, and some days it's like super boring and just whatever is coming to mind. And a lot of times, actually, I find out that I'll surface this inner voice, which is a lot of times some sort of anxiety or worry or something I have in my life. Maybe it's something I'm even excited about. But actually journaling it is a really nice exercise because sometimes I don't really comprehend that it's there. It's just constantly running versus in the morning pages, it lets me get it all out on my paper.
A suggestion that Tim Urban has is looking at your fears. What are you afraid of? What are you afraid of happening? What are you afraid of people judging you about? A lot of times this can tell us about our inner voice and what our mammoth self values.
Oh, I know exactly who my inner voice is when I look at my fear, Sammie. And that mammoth is my mammoth.
Mammoth. Mommy mammoth.
Mommy mammoth. I realized this when I was at home living with my parents, which I always joke is great inner child work. And it was super fun to live with them because I'm an adult and I got to spend extra time with them. But I also realized how much my mom worries about me. She's constantly worried about me, and I realized that my inner fear voice is my mother.
I totally see that.
It doesn't take her voice, but it probably should, because then it would be easier for me to ignore. No offense. But a great example of this is I'm going to Miami for a bachelorette party, and I told my mom this, and I was like, yeah, I'm flying to Miami. I'm getting in at night, and then I'm going to go take an Uber to the VRBO. And she immediately freaks out. She's like, oh my God, you're going to be in an Uber. It's so dangerous. You're going to be in Miami. And she is just so upset about the fact that I have to take an Uber alone by myself in Miami. And she has brought this up in every single conversation I've had with her. Like, we will be talking about what I have for breakfast, and she'll be like, I want to talk to you about Miami. Like, we haven't already talked about it.
Meanwhile, they are actually coming to visit me next weekend, and we need to make an itinerary, and they don't seem to care about that at all.
Our parents actually hate itineraries, but you wouldn't know that by the fact that my mom has asked me to send her my itinerary to Miami, which, once again, I'm a grown woman. But the reason this is my mammoth voice or my inner voice is because I've been worried now about my trip. I've been thinking, oh, I get in late. Like, what if something happens? She's right. I'm going to be by myself. It's nighttime, which is absolutely insane. I'm not saying something can't happen, but I have literally been in over 5,000 Ubers. There was a point in time where I was like the top 1% of Uber users. I'm not proud of this. I spent a lot of money. I probably could have bought a nice car with the amount of money I was spending on Uber.
Could be fire by now.
I could be fire if I just walked more. But the truth is like, honestly, probably 99% of them were generally apathetic and fine experiences. A small percentage was very positive. I've always had really great conversations with my drivers in different cities.
And a small percentage changed the dial to a Bollywood station as soon as you get in the car. I don't know why that happens so frequently in Ubers. They like turn it to a Bollywood station and they're kind of like looking in the rearview mirror, like raising their eyebrows like, you like this, don't you?
Literally, in San Francisco specifically, they have a Bollywood station on the radio. And I don't know why. This has happened to me at least 3 or 4 times where I get in the car and all of a sudden they switch the radio. I hear something from Kabhi Khushi Kabhie Gham pop up. And I'm just like, okay. You just wanted to listen to Bollywood music right now? Just to clarify, these people are not Indian.
No.
And one time, Sammie and I were in this car, and this guy was like, we're like, maybe this is a coincidence. And then he goes, oh, my radio is a special magic radio that senses the ethnicity of my people.
I think this is what they call like beyond dad jokes, is like grandfather jokes, where like it's lame and it's like politically incorrect.
And if you're thinking, did that conversation get worse? It did. It did.
He was like, in a future life, I will have an Indian wife.
Literally, these are words that came out of his mouth.
Though we were not scared of getting taken.
No, actually, I was just not feeling it. And Sammie's being very kind and having a conversation with him. But that has happened a few times. You know, I will say a couple of times an Uber driver, a nice older gentleman, has told me that he wished that he could have a Indian wife. And I have survived.
I don't think our mom's fears are going to be really nullified by this episode.
Luckily, by the time this one comes out, I think I'll be back. Point being, my mother is my fear voice. And sometimes when I recognize that, I'm like, oh my goodness, that is my mother. She's obviously always worried about me. I don't need to fear these things. I will be fine, or I'll figure it out when it happens.
And another way to recognize your inner voice is by thinking about what you really enjoy being praised about.
That's right. Praise. You thought that it was all negative, but no. Your inner voice can also love praise. It can be fed by the love and adoration of others.
It's true. Your mammoth gets praise. It says, we are going to stay another day in this little community zone and we will be safe. And usually the praise that makes us feel the most happy is the thing that the mammoth is the most worried about, the thing that we are the most insecure about.
And the reason this is important, Sammie, is because the goal for us is to recognize your authentic voice, to recognize what is important to you. I have this mantra when I'm putting stuff online, especially as I've gotten a little bit more popular and have gotten more positive feedback. I love the positive feedback. I love great words. Words of affirmation is one of my top love languages. But I do remind myself, I'm not as good as they say I am. I'm not as bad as they say I am. And the reason I have this mantra is because I want to write and post podcast online. I want to create content that I'm excited about, that I want to focus in on and share my thoughts. And sometimes what can happen in the world of writing, in the world of creating, is people start to compliment how much they like one specific topic. For me, a lot of people enjoy my topics about sabbaticals. A lot of people enjoy my topics about quitting drinking. And I loved writing about those topics, but I also have other things that I want to write about. And I felt before a fear that if I switch topics, I will lose my readers or I will lose the people that follow me. And that's doing a disservice to me because I'm then denying my authentic voice. My goal is to become a better writer. It is not necessarily to move into a specific niche that other people enjoy.
And you're exactly right, Michelle, when you say that this inner voice, this inner mammoth voice, it blocks our authentic voice. That's the main problem with it. It wouldn't be such a big deal to be constantly on a monologue all day long, but the thing is, this monologue of the inner voice it blocks our true, authentic voice. Some might call it your intuition. I remember when I got an email that said that there is a job in a small town that pays very well in the middle of a desert and Spanish speaking is preferred. And I remember that I had wanted a job like that, but at the same time, when I looked up the small town, it seemed pretty crazy to move there. But I had this strong pull to move to this place. And it did feel a little bit crazy to me. So I did what any person does when they think they have a crazy idea, which is ask others for their opinion. And that is when I got a lot of mammoth voices coming at me. They were like, this town does not seem safe. You need to learn how to use a gun. Here is a taser.
I still don't understand why people associate small town with unsafe. But at least we have a taser.
Yeah. They were like, maybe when you move there, your dad can come stay with you for 2 weeks, and then you can live alone. Just like very extreme fears about moving to this place. And sometimes those fears would scare me too. Like that mammoth voice would come in and I would think, oh, I don't know. Like I'm going to be so far away from everything. I don't know anything about what this place is like. The job could be crazy. And I just had so many doubts, but I was still able to hear that authentic voice inside that was like, yes, this is what you're supposed to do. And I felt the authentic voices pull so strongly that despite all the concerns, all the unusual things about moving to the middle of nowhere and literally having no idea what that would be like, despite all of that, I knew that this is what I was supposed to do.
I remember that, Sammie. Strangely, nobody was worried about me when I said I would come with you.
I think at that point, my parents, the typical mammoth voice for you, Michelle, were just happy that I had somebody to be there with me.
They were like, we don't really know what you're doing anyway, so I guess this is better than living at home with your parents.
Even though I didn't know why the authentic voice was pulling me there, I did listen to the authentic voice. And now that I'm here, I get it. Being here, I have a more peaceful job. I make more money, so I have a higher gap between my expenses and my income. I have more time. I'm just able to fully go into my passions and save up for my future and save up for financial independence. And I think there was a sense inside of me that recognized that despite all the madness of moving to a town in the middle of nowhere.
Takeaways.
So, takeaways for this episode, Sammie. Chances are you have an inner voice.
If not, good for you. And maybe we should bring you on for an episode to know what it's like to not have an inner voice.
That's true. I don't know who you would have that internal conflict with, but let us know. The inner voice does manifest itself differently in all people. Some people hear things, some people it's visual. Sometimes it's all the time. For some people, you can be anywhere on the scale of 0 to 100%. But chances are there is something inside of you that's chattering it away.
Takeaway number 2. This inner voice, it served us at some point. It's important to think about maybe why we have this inner voice. As Tim Urban puts it, it's our mammoth voice. It's that protective voice that wants to keep us safe and included so that things are going to be okay for us.
Takeaway number 3, we highly recommend getting in touch with your inner voice. A few ways you can do that is by doing journaling. I love Julia Cameron's morning pages. You can do what Tim Urban advises, which is to look at your fears, look at praises, look at the things that get you going that might be sparking these inner voices. And that's a great way to start just recognizing them and then working backwards. Where is it coming from? Is it your mom? Is it my mom? Who knows?
And finally, this inner voice blocks our authentic voice. That's right. The problem with this inner voice is that it blocks our authentic voice. And hearing our authentic voice is essential to progressing on our path of building a wealthy spirit. We don't even know what that journey would look like unless we can hear our authentic voice.
Exactly, Sammie. Building a wealthy spirit is all about what makes the most sense for you. We talk so much about knowing your values, ignoring external voices, not even thinking about the Jonas Brothers. And The truth is, the best way to start doing that is just taking a moment to actually look at what the dialogue inside your head is telling you.
Community time!
Before we say goodbye, it's our community time.
Speaking of living in a dangerous small town in the middle of nowhere, and to clarify, our town is not that dangerous.
It's not, like, significantly dangerous at all.
There's nothing dangerous about it. There's nothing dangerous. I mean, it's a town. It has its own little vices, but every place does. So we have these drug reps that come to our clinic, and it is super generous that they actually come out to our clinic here because it is 2 hours away from them. So it's pretty kind that they're coming out here to talk to us. And we have this one who's like super nice. Not only does she come to talk to us, but she also will host a dinner every once in a while. And she'll have a doctor come and talk to us in our town. So they both drive all the way out there just to have a dinner with us. It's like extremely kind.
And they bring food from the outside big city world.
Oh yeah, they bring food from the outside world, which is a big deal here. So she is so funny because she does think our town is scary. Like last time she was here, she's like, how do you feel safe here? I'm like, it's like not that unsafe. I live in a neighborhood with mostly older people, so everything is fine.
Older people who are always watching us.
Yes. And she's like, there's so much mental health struggle here. I was telling my mother about it. And so she really feels like she is helping us by coming out. And she is, honestly. So I'm not naysaying that at all. But this week we were supposed to have a drug dinner. And so I go to the Hampton Inn and I get there. I see that she's not there yet. I called her. She said she's running a little bit late because of traffic. So I go get myself a coffee from the lobby. And a free coffee. I grab a coffee and I see a few people I know because, I know everybody in town now. And I decided to take a little seat and pull out my phone and finish listening to a podcast about North Korea.
Oh, God. You've been listening to that all week.
So I'm listening to the podcast and it's a video podcast. So I'm like watching it as well. And I don't notice that half an hour goes by. Nobody has shown up. And the drug rep calls me and she's like, I'm here in the meeting room. So then I go to the meeting room and it's empty. Turns out the dinner was at the Holiday Inn. So then I'm like, okay, don't worry, I'm coming. And mind you, like, there's only 2 providers that are actually coming to this dinner. So it's kind of like a big deal that I'm not there. It's like they made this whole trip and I'm not going to be there. It's a pain.
I love how this town is so small. I know you still managed to go to the wrong place.
So then I take my coffee. Now I'm just a person who's drinking free coffee at the Hampton Inn where everybody knows me. Watching a very traumatic podcast. And I go head over to the Holiday Inn. I go to the Holiday Inn. I apologize for being late. And they had this California Pizza Kitchen there, so it was 100% worth it. And at the end of the dinner, I'm packing up food, which I always pack up like a bunch of food. Because, they're not going to take it, and we don't get this kind of food. And I take some to work. I take some home to Michelle. And so I'm packing up the food and I'm talking to the drug rep and I'm like, oh yeah, this week was the fair. So all the kids in our town get the whole week off for the fair. All of them, they're part of this 4-H club. They get to raise an animal. It can be like a pig or a lamb or a goat.
Mm.
Each one of them raises an animal, which they bring to the fair. And then the animals compete and then they are slaughtered. And then they all like take home the meat and eat it. And so once again, the drug rep is like, just like, oh my God, what is this savage town that you live in?
Sammie, I love that you, in many situations, had no inner voice there. I think mine would have been going crazy. Oh, am I so stressed out? I'm in the wrong place. Am I late? Then getting all the food, I always feel very embarrassed.
When it comes to those things, I don't have an inner voice. I'm like, bring the Tupperware, ladies, because we're getting food from CPK today.
I appreciate that because oftentimes too, I'm like, you know what? If this is going in the trash, I guess why am I being so worked up about it? A shout out to our community, by the way.
Yes.
John messaged me and he said, I'm listening to your Fire vs. Sabbatical episode and I just LOL'd at your Buddha was on sabbatical joke. Glad to know you enjoyed that, John, because guess what? I guess in this episode, we have more Buddha jokes.
Buddha just comes up a lot.
If you enjoy enlightenment verse humor, I think this is the podcast for you.
And John also listens while exercising.
Oh, yeah. You know what? I love that. So many people, I think, I would love to know if women do this too. I mean, they must, I guess. But a lot of guys have told us that they listen while exercising. And I think we need to add a little bit more of like a soul cycle element to our show, like
I listen while exercising too.
Oh,
and I would love a podcast version of Soul Cycle. Oh my God.
Right?
Literally?
Can you imagine us? All right. Today, we are your inner voice. And we are here to say that you can do it. Okay? You might be lifting weights. You might be going on a run. You might be thinking to yourself, I'm not sure if I can do this today. No, let me tell you something. You can do this today because we believe in you. You believe in you. You got this.
Podcast Soul Cycle sounds even better than regular Soul Cycle, and I'm a huge Soul Cycle fan, so that's a big compliment.
We can't go to Soul Cycle, so we need Podcast Soul Cycle.
There's definitely no Soul Cycle in this town.
I guess Podcast Soul Cycle is kind of like, what's that brand? Peloton? So there's that.
And we are going to be having an episode about bachelorettes and finances. Bachelorettes or bachelor parties. Hen parties, whatever you call them in your town.
Neighbor corner of the world.
Yes.
We would love to know if you've been to a bachelorette, a bachelor party, if you were planning one, if you have any positive experiences with helping people with money, planning finances around it. If you want to vent, if you want to complain, if you're like, I went to this bachelorette party and they brought a stripper and I didn't even want to pay for the stripper. Next thing you know, I'm throwing out singles. I don't know what your story is.
Next thing you know, I'm having to eat thousands of gummy bears and I don't even like eating sugar.
Whatever story specific to you, share your inner voice with us. We would love to know. We're going to talk about it because bachelorette parties, that's a big line item for us. We're popular. We love a good lady strip. So
yes,
we're going to break it down after mine.
Yes. So if you have any tips on bachelor parties or bachelorette parties or combo bachelorette parties, any thoughts, any advice, comment on this episode and let us know. And maybe we'll include it in that episode.
That's right. And where can you comment it? buildawealthyspirit.com. On our Substack for this episode show notes, I'll make a mention of it in the actual show notes. I'll put a link to it on your podcast player. You can find any references that we made and let us know your thoughts. We will include it next episode.
And most importantly, be sure to join us next time as we put down the rule book and we rethink the status quo.